All right, if we want to look at 11, 11's the same exact thing, just a tiny bit more complicated, but nothing we can't do. And so because I have a radical on the bottom, but I kind of have an a plus radical of b, I want to times by the conjugate, which means I want to times by a minus radical of b. And so that means I'm going to times by a fancy 1, which is going to be 2, not plus, but minus square root 3 over 2 minus square root 3. Remember, this is just a fancy 1. All right, so using my techniques, I know I'm going to have to distribute the negative 4 at the top. So negative 4 times 2 is going to be negative 8. And then negative 4 times a negative square root 3 is going to be a positive 4 square root 3. So that's my numerator, that's my top. Then I'm going to have to do my FOIL trick. So I'm going to have 2 times 2, which is going to be 4 on the bottom, and then I'm going to have 2 times negative square root 3, which is a negative 2 square root 3. Remember, 2's on my outside, negative 3's on my inside, and I have a negative. So then I'm going to do a square root 3 times 2, and 2's on my outside and 3's on my inside, so I'll have a plus 2 square root 3. Gotta extend that. Then lastly, I'm going to have a square root 3 times a negative square root 3. A positive times a negative will be a negative. And I have no one inside my house, but I got 2 3's on the, I have no one on the outside of my house, but I got 2 3's on the inside of my house. And so now if we were to reduce this, these guys end up canceling out. All right, and then 2 3's, yeah, they can come out. I end up getting negative 8 plus 4 square root 3 all over 4, because I still have this 4 right here, minus a 3. Well, that can be reduced to negative 8 plus 4 square root 3 all over 1. And if anything is over 1, it is just itself. So lastly, my real answer can be negative 8 plus 4 square root 3. And that is my final answer to this problem. All right, so let's move on to number 12. Number 12, well, this is using the basics, except this basics actually has some negatives, meaning I'm going to have to use some complex numbers. Complex numbers are fine. I know that if I have a negative, it's just really bringing a negative out there. The negative bringing it out is going to be an I square root 3, and then this negative bringing that out is going to be times an I square root 6. All right, good enough for me. Now let's multiply. I have an I on my outside and an I on my outside. So I'm going to have an I squared on my outside. Then on my inside, I have a 3 and a 6, but I know I can break 6 down into 2 times 3. All right, so I'm just going to break 6 down over here into 2 times 3. I have 2 3's, so what do you think can come out? A 3 can come out, and I have this I squared. So I squared, again, we can say is a negative 1. On my outside, I'm going to have a 3 times a negative 1, and then on my inside, I will have a 2. And remember, the negative 1 is from I squared, and we said a 3 can come out. So what's negative 1 times 3? Negative 3. And you have a square root 2. That is your answer. What about number 13? Well, number 13, what I have for you, I don't like this radical in the bottom. However, what if I can reduce this a little bit more? What if I put everything under one big roof? So I have 108 divided by 3. Well, I know negative 108, okay, can go into 3 how many times? Well, that's 3 times. I have 9, so I'm just going to make that pause real quick. So I'm going to have 18, and then I know that's 6, so it can go into it 36 times, all right? So what I'm going to do then, I can really say this is reduced to a square root negative 36, because remember, I still have that negative there. If it's negative 36, I can take an I out and just make that a positive 36, and I know 36 is a perfect square. If I didn't, you could break it down by 2, 18, then 2 and 9, then 3 and 3. And then you would notice a 3 would come out and a 2 would come out. And it's going to be a perfect square of 6. So then it becomes a positive 6i as your answer. If I ever go too many steps for you or you find a shortcut, please do the shortcut as long as it works every single time and it works for you. I'm just going to be explaining everything in full. So now looking at this, I'm going to have 3 times negative 2. So I have 3 times negative 2. That's going to be negative 6. Then I have 3 times a positive 7i. It's going to be 21i. And then I'm going to have a negative 5i times a negative 2. Well, that's going to be a positive 10i. And lastly, I'll have a negative 5i times a 7i, and that's going to be a negative, because a negative times a positive is a negative, not 15, what am I thinking? It's going to be 35i squared. Alright, well, now simplifying, I still have my negative 6, but these guys can add together, can't they? They're going to add to a 31i. And then I squared, remember, we can replace that with a negative 1. So I'm going to have negative 35 times negative 1. All right, let's simplify that more. I get a negative 6 plus 31i, and then a negative 1 times 35 is going to be a plus 35. Well, these two things can combine. So negative 6 plus a 35, that's going to give me a 31i plus 29. And that is your final answer for that. That is the most simplified form you can possibly get with complex numbers. Moving on lastly to 15, it's not any different, it's just a little bit more practice with what we've been doing. So again, 2 times 2, 4. 2 times negative 3i, remember that's a negative 3i, you have a negative 6i. And so then I'm going on to my next part. I have a negative 7i times 2. So I have a negative 14i. And then I'm going to have a negative 7i times a negative 3. And that's going to be a positive, because 2 negatives make a positive, 21i squared. Alright, so if I were to simplify this even more, I can see these two terms. They can be combined. So I have 4, a negative 6 minus 14. Again, we're working backwards. We have a negative 6 and we're minusing more. So it's going to be a negative 20i. Alright, then I have a plus 21i squared, but we know from experience I squared equals negative 1. So I have a plus 21 times negative 1. Let's simplify this more. I get 4 minus 20i, and then a negative 1 times a positive is going to give you a negative 21. Well, it's 4 minus 21. 4 minus 21 is a negative 17, and you still have this negative 20i left, so it's going to be negative 17 minus 20i, and that is your answer.